This show is sponsored by Charles Schwab. There's strength in numbers. Charles Schwab has 25 million clients and over $7 trillion in client assets, 400 local branches, 36,000 employees, 24/7 live help, and 50 years of experience. There's strength in those numbers, and at Charles Schwab, investors are the number one priority. Visit aboutschwab.com for the numbers and schwab.com to learn more. Hey there, Culture Gabfest listeners. Before we get started, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later in the show. It's from our partners at Macy's. For over a decade, Macy's has partnered with the Trevor Project, the leading suicide prevention organization for LGBTQ young people. From June 1st to the 30th, you can support the Trevor Project by rounding up your Macy's in-store purchase or donating online. Stick around to hear from Sophie from the Trevor Project.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Closed Captions On or Off edition. It's Wednesday, June 14th, 2023. On today's show, the film Past Lives tells the story of two childhood friends who meet in middle school, fall in love in that middle school way, and then are separated when one of them emigrates to America. It's the feature film debut of writer-director Celine Song. And then The Ultimatum, Queer Love. It's on Netflix. It's a reality bonanza in which a wavering partner faces an ultimatum. Then both partners try new quote-unquote trial wives. Oh my. And finally, why are people reading TV, as it were, leaving subtitles on even when the show's in English? We discuss an Atlantic article about the trend. I'm joined now by Dana Stevens, film critic of Slate.com. Hey, Dana.
Hello, Stephen.
And Julia's out this week, so we have a couple people subbing in, the first of whom is Sam Adams, who's going to join us for our first segment. Sam, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again.
And you're joining us to discuss the movie Past Lives. It stars Greta Lee and Tae Yoo as two childhood friends in Seoul, South Korea, who get separated when she moves to the United States. As young adults, they reconnect over Facebook, Skype for hours, and this only serves to intensify the melancholy of what might have been. Confused, she breaks it off. Now it's another 12 years later. She's married, and her semi-imaginary, semi-real paramour is coming to visit her in New York City. This is the debut feature by Celine Song, who wrote the film as well. It's in theaters now. Let's listen to a clip. Okay, in this scene, Nora, played by Greta Lee, has just finished explaining the Korean concept of inyon, or fate, to the young man who will be her future husband, it turns out, Arthur. He's played by John Magaro. Inyon, she explains to him, is the kind of kismet that happens when two people encounter each other over multiple lifetimes, and eventually, finally, they fall in love. Let's listen to Arthur's reply.
Do you believe in that?
Believe what?
That you and I knew each other in another life.
Because we're sitting here at the same table in the same city at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wouldn't that make this inyan?
That's just something Koreans say to seduce someone.
Sam, let me start with you. You saw this movie at Sundance when it premiered. I mean, it's a quintessential film festival darling. It seems to have transferred to release quite successfully. Every headline I read indicates a rapturous experience on the part of the critic. Virtually every headline. What about you?
Yeah, well, this is a classic festival experience for me, too. At Sundance, I really just kind of lucked into it. Celine Song's most recent play, Endlings, happened to be the last piece of theater I saw before the pandemic. This was the first in-person Sundance since the pandemic. It just felt like kismet or inyon, I guess, that I should go see this movie on a weekend afternoon. And it was an A24 movie. I remember when I saw the play, they told me she was working on something for A24, and it's like, oh, that's nice, interesting. So I went into this thing and just emerged, 100 minutes later, just completely blown away by this movie. It's really wonderful and heartfelt and lyrical. I think particularly for people who are prone to regret sort of professional sad bastards, as we like to think of ourselves, this just hits like right in the middle. So yeah, just like tremendously moved by this, really blown away by the performance by Greta Lee, who I think most people will know from mostly kind of bit parts on shows like Russian Doll. She is the sweet birthday baby friend on that show.
Sweet birthday baby!
But really just reveals herself to be an incredibly talented and rich actress in this movie.
Dana, what about you? Were you rapturous or...
Well, I mean, I've been looking forward to it since Sundance because of precisely what Sam describes. There's always that one movie that emerges from Sundance with pretty much a consensus of rapture. And with, I guess, a couple of exceptions, this was really it for this year. So this has been one of my most anticipated. Yeah, I think to me, the most impressive thing about this is that it's a playwright's first movie. It just has such a sure-footed sense of pacing and of visuals. It's not a visually splashy movie. It's basically about people talking in rooms, but the way it establishes this, pretty long stretch of time of 3 different 12-year spans in these people's lives is so deftly handled, with the camera and the editing. It just feels like a filmmaker's film. So the idea that it's a young playwright making her first movie was exciting to me. Also, I think it's worth observing the things that this movie doesn't do. It's really a romance that proceeds by ellipses, I mean, there's so much of the characters' lives that we don't see in between the time skips. And there's also so many typical beats of a movie that more or less is sort of about a romantic triangle, or at least a possible romantic triangle that we don't hit. And I really respected that restraint that the movie shows. The one critique I think I would have about it, and I wonder what the two of you think about this, is because the main character, played by Greta Lee, is essentially a proxy. She's even a playwright, just like Celine Song. I mean, she really is a stand-in for Celine Song. And I think we get to know her so much better in terms of the time we spend with her and the amount of disclosure about her character than we do either of the two men. I think the critique could be made that this is a little bit of that this is a movie about propping up the experience of one person's autobiography and to some degree making the other two legs of the tripod into just supports for that character's story.
For me, the sort of somewhat, I don't know, sort of like almost iconic or archetypal vision of the two men is sort of more of a feature than a bug. I mean, this is really a character who is caught up in things that could have been the life she could have led had her family not emigrated from Korea when she was 12. So these characters are sort of imagined figures to her in some way. And I think the movie, without just treating them as figments of her imagination, does sort of keep us on that side of the fence where they're concerned.
My worry for this movie is that many of the headlines indicate it's the best film of the year. A few even say best film of the last several years, and a couple, I'm pretty sure, of the millennium. And I think the perfect place to see it is Sundance or a film festival, or having heard very little about it. And then your expectations are sized only by the movie itself in some sense. And that would be a profoundly satisfying experience. I was not at all sure I loved the film for about the first full 50 minutes. I felt that it's not just that it's sort of impressionistically drawn, and it's that I felt scenes were over and over and over again cut off very early. They're oddly quick, even scenes that are meant to describe, hours long Skype calls, which is, the moment where they reconnect in their early 20s, now adults, young adults. There's something about the lack of, as an audience member, it's not that these characters aren't deeply drawn or portrayed deeply by the actors. It's that you yourself are not losing yourself into a scene in that deep way that makes you feel as though you are there with those people. And but something began to happen to me, oddly. It's the thing that I texted a friend who had loved it after I got out was the thing about that movie, it sneaks the fuck up on you. And it's funny. What I found really interesting, Dana, is that there's now a lot of, maybe it's the age of social media or COVID or God knows what, but there are a lot of like counterfactual narratives, right? Like even Marvel movies and Spider-Verse, right? It's like, who would I be in a parallel string theorized universe? Or, even the Ultimatum, right? The reality TV show we're going to talk about. This movie is such a uniquely gentle and contemplative take on what it is for regret to be part of the palette of human emotions no matter what, as opposed to a kind of fantasy projection of, total fulfillment as another person. It reminded me less of like string theory Marvel superhero movies and more of like Jhumpa Lahiri's short stories in some sense. Like it is very much about having a life split in two by emigrating. And I ended up like loving the picture.
Yeah, Justin Chang in the LA Times wrote that in a strange way, it's almost like this is a very contemplative, realist take on everything, everywhere, all at once, right? In that it's an Asian American immigrant story that also, in a way, looks at possible other lives. Except here, the possible other lives are not, crazy psychedelic pings into different universes, but just simply, what if my parents hadn't immigrated? What if I had lived the life that I was born into instead of having this particular diasporic story that she has? And I think that's beautifully handled in the film also because the film doesn't focus on it. It's something of a given, that she has absorbed that in her life. So that, for example, I think in a lot of immigration stories where someone is either first generation American or immigrated with their parents, there's a lot of scenes with the parents where the parents sort of represent the old ways and the traditional world, and the kid is rebelling against that. Maybe that does happen to this character. We don't know. But because we skip so many years of her life up to the point where she is a well-adjusted and completely integrated, American citizen, we don't get that, I think, by now somewhat cliched push and pull between the ways of the old world and the ways of the new world. Instead, she feels comfortable. She feels American. She feels fine in her interracial marriage with her husband until this kind of ghost, right? This creature from her past comes along. And here again, I have to go back to what I think is maybe the weakness of the film, and to pinpoint it a little bit more. I think it has to do with the character of Hae Sung, with the Korean man who comes back into her life from her childhood. He is the one that we need to know and understand a little bit more about, because he is the more heartbroken one as the movie starts. He's the one who seeks her out, in adulthood for the first time. And they get drawn into this long distance Skype relationship. But all that we know about him is that he longs for her. And that doesn't seem quite fair to him as a character. I guess I felt like I needed a little bit more time with him. The slightness of this movie is part of its beauty and charm. But the slightness can also sometimes work against it a wee bit. And I think that character could have been better fleshed out.
There's an enormous amount of discipline in this movie, in that not only do you not have the cliched scenes with the, less assimilated, parents or whatever, there's no sex and there's no fighting, right? Like I was like, I came out of the movie, I was like, no one yells, no one raises their voice, no one makes a threat, no one makes a pass, no one expresses longing as a specifically sexual yearning. It's a very undomineering movie about people who aren't domineering and prone to outbursts of drama. And I actually came away thinking that was very disciplined. And I think, Sam, one of the ways to make that happen is, Hae Sung has to be drawn in a distant way, because he is a symbolic, he hovers between being a symbolic and a real figure for her. And so that's how he's presented in the context of the movie, which is essentially her movie. It's her story. Anyway, where'd you come out on that?
I do think we're talking about with the character of Hae Sung. I mean, yeah, he is somewhat Greta Lee's character, Nora, her sort of attachment to her home country, and also the question of like whether or not she actually has that attachment, or it's just sort of something she feels like she should be missing. The clip we played where you have this sort of almost, the way it's put in this movie, this almost like perfectly rom-com ready concept of inyeon, which here is like fate or romantic destiny. And then her being like, yeah, that's just something Korean people say when they're trying to get into somebody's pants. But that sort of back and forth with, I think the first time we see her 12-year-old character, she's choosing her English name, Nora, for her new life, and saying that she wants to go to the U.S. because she wants to be a famous writer, and that's where all the good prizes are, when you're never going to win a Pulitzer if you still live in South Korea. So she's, very enthusiastic about moving forward. But then once she gets there, she just thinks about this other thing that she might have had. And it's not that she wants to go back, and there's no sort of, alpha male brawling between the two dudes over which of them is going to end up with her. It's just like, do I really regret this? Am I a person who is always going to be looking at somewhere else, no matter how good where I am is? Is this just sort of my existential condition to regret things? Am I that kind of person? And I feel like it really like speaks to that in a very potent and subtle way. But, to go back to the word I used before, I think it's just like a lovely movie, and I wouldn't put, greatest of any period of time on it. I would just sort of urge people to go see it and enjoy themselves.
Here. Let's button with that. Please go see it. It's really worth it. The movie is Past Lives. It's in theaters. Sam, as always, a total pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thank you all.
This show is sponsored by Charles Schwab. There's strength in numbers. Charles Schwab has 25 million clients and over $7 trillion in client assets, 400 local branches, 36,000 employees, 24/7 live help, and 50 years of experience. There's strength in those numbers, and at Charles Schwab, investors are the number one priority. Visit aboutschwab.com for the numbers and schwab.com to learn more.
Reboot your credit card with Apple Card, the credit card created by Apple. It gives you unlimited daily cash back that you can now choose to grow in a high-yield savings account at 4.15% annual percentage yield. That's more than 10 times higher than the national average savings rate. Apply for Apple Card now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility requirements. Savings accounts provided by Goldman Sachs Bank, USA, member FDIC. National average savings rate is from FDIC website. Terms apply.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast where we discuss business. Dana, what do we have?
Steve, the items of business we have this week are twofold. First of all, we want to remind you once again that our annual Summer Strut episode is coming up. For new listeners who might not know about it, every summer we have a show where we ask listeners to help us crowdsource a big playlist on Spotify, the kind of songs you like to listen to when you're out for a summer strut style walk. If you have ideas to put on the playlist, you can email them to us at culturefest@slate.com. We'll compile a playlist over the next month or so, and then each of us will pick our favorite songs and discuss them on a special Summer Strut episode later this summer with Chris Molanphy, who always comes in and helps us sort through the history and meaning of all of this pop music. Once again, please send your catchy, summery songs to culturefest@slate.com. And I forgot to mention this last time, but put Summer Strut in the subject line when you do, so that we immediately know that they go to that Spotify playlist. Our second item of business is to tell you about today's Slate Plus segment. Because Julia's out, we're having Rebecca Onion, Slate's senior editor, come in to join us for a conversation about therapy speak. We were noticing that multiple articles have been making the rounds lately that talk about how words deriving from the world of therapy, either psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, cognitive behavioral therapy, all different kind of schools of thought, are creeping into everyday life more and more. So you have people online talking about their boundaries and their triggers and self-diagnosing with various disorders. There was a recent piece in the New York Times by Jessica Grose called Doing the Work and the Obsession with Superficial Self-Improvement. That was the basis for our discussion, but then we started reading more and thinking more about it. It's a big conversation. So we'll talk about that with Rebecca Onion in our Slate Plus segment. If you're a Slate Plus member, please stay tuned for that conversation at the end of this show. And if you're not a Slate Plus member, you can become one at slate.com/cultureplus. When you're a Slate Plus member, you will get ad-free podcasts. You'll get bonus content like the segment I just described, and you'll get unlimited access to all of the wonderful writing on Slate. Best of all, you'll be supporting our work and the work of all the journalists that we work with. These memberships mean a lot for Slate, so please sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Once again, that URL is slate.com/cultureplus. All right, Steve, back to the show.
Okay, for the next two segments, we'll be joined by Rick Fopp, really close friend of the program. June Thomas. Hey, June.
Mr. Stephen Metcalf. So nice to be here.
Thank you. The proper form of address is appreciated. You're joining us from Edinburgh. That's kind of thrilling, right? What an amazing city.
It's very lovely. The weather is beautiful.
And of course, June is a host of the Working podcast, and you're working on a book, June, about lesbian spaces. When is that going to be out?
It's going to be out in June 2024, inshallah.
Inshallah. We're very excited to talk about it when it comes out. But for now, the reality bonanza continues with The Ultimatum, Queer Love. The premise: one person is sure, one is unsure, is a fence sitter or commitment phobe or some variety of attachment disordered narcissist. Who's to say? It's reality TV. Anyway, four such couples gather at a resort then swap partners. They take a quote-unquote trial wife for 3 weeks, then return to their original partner for another 3 weeks, and then the decision, get engaged, and the relationship continue with the trial wife, on and on. Let's listen to a clip. You'll hear one of the couples, Zonder and Vanessa. Zonder wants to get married, but Vanessa wants to continue exploring her options. Here they are talking about the experiment before it begins.
It's going to be super weird to see you with anyone else. And obviously, like, I cannot picture you with someone else right now, and I can't picture myself with someone else. But if that opportunity, like, comes and feels natural, let's both feel free enough to explore that. It's so shitty to say, but like, let's not hold ourselves back. Like, we thought this experience was a good idea. That's why we're here. Commit to it.
I kind of don't want to do this anymore. Let's just be together.
I know, but that wouldn't solve anything. You know, like that brings us right back to where we are right now, where you want to get married and I don't.
I know, but I don't want to.
You're having commitment issues, I think, San.
You think so?
You know, don't get mad at me if I like someone, right?
Oh, man. June, let me start with you. I mean, reality TV always struck me as a oxymoron, you know, like, married bachelor or something. And here we are, how many decades into it, and you can still throw people together under highly artificial circumstances, produce an enormous amount of telegenic drama. What do you make of this show?
I wish I could give you an answer other than I was so into it. Oh my God, I loved every minute of it. I was obsessed with it. I dreamt about it. I was just counting the minutes until the final episodes aired so I could find out what the hell had happened. But obviously it's awful.
Exactly. Dana, what about you?
Well, wait, first I have to bounce a question back to June,
Please.
Which I know, June, from prior discussions with you and also from you having talked about this on the Outward podcast, that you are not even normally a reality TV person. So you had a lot to jump over in order to get into the Ultimatum : queer love, because it is a very typically structured and, as you observe on that podcast, very typically padded out to all hell kind of reality show. So I just want to know a bit more about why this managed to jump over that fence for you.
Well, it's the stuff after the : queer love. I mean, I was there for that. I was there for the dyke drama. And as we probably will discuss, I actually thought that it was a failure when it came to really kind of grappling with how queer people are different and how their relationships are or can be different. But yeah, it was like a classic situation where I was seeing my people reflected, and I just it grabbed me. And I have to also just I have to argue with you a little bit. I didn't think it was all that padded out. I mean, I think that is an absolutely righteous complaint about network reality. But other than a little bit of stretching in the picking episode, I never really did know what they called that when they were selecting their trial wives. I thought it actually was moving too fast. I wanted to know a little bit more about what was going on. So I think in that sense, it was like the premise was ridiculous in the way that they have to be for reality shows. But I thought the pacing was atypically sprightly.
Yeah, as far as the padding, maybe it's because I haven't watched enough episodes of the show. I think I just felt like they spent a very, very long time establishing who these people are. It was sort of like, I get it. I get their names and their relationships to each other. And there seemed to be a great deal of reestablishment of that. But maybe that becomes necessary later on because of all the switching that starts to happen. I mean, here it's hard for me to have an opinion because I think I have basically felt the same about every one of these kinds of reality shows I've ever seen. As soon as there's a reality show where people had to audition for the show, presumably, right? There had to be a period where a bunch of different queer couples approached the producers of the show and said, I would like to be on TV, and got vetted to make sure that there was, this kind of diverse group of people that would do something interesting on TV together. After that, where's the reality? It just felt like a scripted show to me in a way, right? I mean, the rules, as you say, June, are so artificial. I know the silliness is part of it, but the idea is supposed to be that these people are testing their relationships. But this is a very self-selected group of people who all want to go on TV and be seen testing their relationships. So I always see that behind it. I always
Right.
imagine the the moment of audition or the moment of a couple sitting down to dinner saying like, how are we going to prepare for our attempt to get on a reality show to test our relationship? And that artificiality was just really, really hard to get beyond. I'm curious, Steve, how you felt about that, given that you're a Bachelorette guy. Like in straight form, you have watched this kind of thing season after season. So how does it feel to see this lesbian twist on it?
I fear I'm here for the wrong reasons, Dana. I was all in and eating this up greedily with both hands. I mean, I hear your point. I haven't watched a show like this in a long time. And at first I thought getting over the hump here going to be tough, but for precisely that reason, like this selection problem, like who would agree to do this and why. You always have, to my mind, especially as the medium's quote unquote matured, right? It's actually immatured. It's gotten worse because people now tailor an entire personality around appearing on TV. And so it attracts a certain kind of, a narcissistic, melodrama addict, in some sense, exhibitionistic, on and on. Here, I thought the problem was like weirdly obviated because of the couple format, right? Because the very problem at the heart of the show is you have one person presumably capable of stability and commitment. And let's just imagine that person is the least or less likely, at least of the two, to appear on or want to appear on such a show. And then you've got this sort of, slightly sexy, slightly more narcissistic person prone to longing and commitment phobia or whatever, who's more traditionally maybe a reality TV exhibitionist. And so you're sort of seeing play out in the internal dynamics of their relationship, kind of something along the lines of the desire to participate or not participate in something like this. One person is just desperate and wants the experiment to result in marriage. But then that leads to what's interesting, which is as they repair, you're trying to figure out, you've got kind of, just very broadly speaking, you've got sexy, boring dyads, and then you repair, and then all of a sudden you've got sexy, boring. And you're like, wait a second, that boring couple, like there's some deep soul Velcro forming there. And like, God, I hope they stay together, right? Each of you can afford to lose this, narcissistic dead weight. You don't need that in your lives. And plus you're looking for comeuppance from, sexy or, whatever. I mean, it's just like, I got all in. It was incendiary. It's so fucking sensationalistic. My reptile self was just slithering in joy around the sofa with each new scene. And I was watching it with my kids who were just like, way over the moon for this whole thing. It just is. It's like, what's gonna happen? Next. I was all in. I have nothing but that primitive reaction to it. I'm sorry.
I have two responses to your reaction, Stephen. The first of which is, I thought that the show's biggest problem was the lack of chemistry. Like there was very little sexy anywhere. Like none of the couples, either in their original format or in their reconstituted format, seemed to have much spark or much, just joy, really.
Yeah, interesting.
And then the second part of it was that it's funny what your take on, as you say, the two halves, the ultimatum giver and the receiver, and how probably the giver would just be, unlikely to reconstitute. Well, without giving anything particular away, in fact, it was two of the ultimatum givers, the tops, as somebody put it in the show, who get closest to each other. So that was interesting. I hadn't really thought that, that there's an issue in the structure that's going to get in the way, because it didn't work out that way. And that was kind of interesting. I think most people will, especially, because this is a queer version, would have thought, the masc femness of it all will kind of get in the way of coupledom. And it's true that, for the most part, the masc femme couples, all the femmes found another masc for the most part. So that was an interesting twist that in the end kind of it didn't twist, but that could have been a twist. And just generally, I was kind of a little disappointed by just how, for all of the queerness of it, it's there in the title, they never discussed people's pronouns, as far as I could tell. And like, they didn't all use she, her pronouns.
No.
And I didn't want like a little teach-in. I didn't want an educational session on pronouns. Yep. But effectively, at least two of the people were constantly being misgendered and so that felt a bit like, well, you say this is queer love, but you're just doing the same. And they're so obsessed with marriage in a way that, like, I don't know, it just didn't feel particularly queer to me. I get that marriage, like, is about some rights and benefits that you can get. I mean, to me, that's what it's about. And I get that it's awkward for anyone to have that conversation about what it really means. There were just some missed opportunities for me that I just wish they could have explored a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's, now that you say that, June, I think that was something that was kind of nagging at me as I was watching, and I felt like I am neither queer, nor am I a reality show devotee who's watched a lot of this stuff. So I didn't know exactly how to formulate it, but I think that's it. There's something heteronormative about the mere existence and format of this show, which is exemplified by the fact that the hostess, who, as reality hostesses do, just sort of appears in a gown to stiffly say a few words at the beginning of each episode, is straight. And that's one of the first interactions that the contestants have with her, is that they ask, are you gay or are you straight? And it turns out that she's straight, which I guess some watchers of the show have objected to. This is not me objecting to it exactly, just observing that the structure that we're in, right? A straight lady comes and shows you a bunch of gay ladies, and then they all pursue the goal of marriage. There's not a lot there that's veering outside of, the conventional heteronormative constraints that you would see on any kind of dating reality show, whatever the makeup of the contestants may be.
I must mention before we end this segment that I was so excited to watch the final episode, which is the reunion episode where they gather together a year after the show was made, when everybody has seen the show, they've seen the edits. And there are things that are revealed in that show that kind of took the bloom off the rose. I was treating this as a frothy, fun, bit of nonsense. And I'm not going to spoil it. I just want people to know, prepared to be disappointed and aggravated by stuff that was hidden, and that really kind of left a bad taste in my mouth about the show. So even though I can't deny all the enthusiasm I had for it, it's dead now, I'm afraid.
All right. Well, I guess that's an enticement for me to finish it tonight. But the show is The Ultimatum, Queer Love. It's on Netflix. June, you're sticking around, yeah?
I am.
Excellent.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and Macy's. Hey y'all, what's up? It's your girl, Lene. I'm a writer, creator, and a change maker. And the first step in making meaningful change is talking about the really hard things. Did you know that LGBTQ young people are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers? Macy's and the Trevor Project are on a mission to change that.
The Trevor Project is the leading organization doing crisis intervention and mental health work for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning young people. My name is Sophie Good. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior corporate partnerships manager at the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is a suicide prevention organization. The work that we do is very serious and it's very urgent. As much as we see a bright future and see the opportunities to make change, we know that LGBTQ young people are in pain and in danger right now. And support from Macy's empowers us. We've expanded our crisis services from just having the phone line to also having 24/7 service on text and chat. We've increased our lineup of suicide prevention programming as well. Working towards the world we want to create and making sure that we're showing up for young people in this moment is so important.
Now's the time to help LGBTQ young people in crisis. This June, Pride Month, when you round up your purchase at Macy's or donate online, you'll help fund the Trevor Project's comprehensive approach to suicide prevention among LGBTQ young people. Find out how Macy's is creating brighter futures for all at Macy's.com/purpose.
Reboot your credit card with Apple Card, the credit card created by Apple. It gives you unlimited daily cash back that you can now choose to grow in a high-yield savings account at 4.15% annual percentage yield. That's more than 10 times higher than the national average savings rate. Apply for Apple Card now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start growing your daily cash with savings today. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners subject to eligibility requirements. Savings accounts provided by Goldman Sachs Bank, USA, member FDIC. National average savings rate is from FDIC website. Terms apply.
Okay, why is everyone watching TV with the subtitles on? That's the header for an Atlantic Monthly piece in the June 6th issue. It's by Devin Gordon. It's actually a really good piece, really nicely written. Let me quote from it. Now subtitles are everywhere, he writes. In fact, they may already be our default mode. Cites a bunch of statistics, a bunch of people are using them. He goes on to say, as it turns out, it's a millennial thing, or at least millennials are leading the way. A full 2/3 of Roku's millennial customers use subtitles. Dana, I think we all probably have our own intense relationship to this particular habit and subject. What's yours?
Well, let me start off with a caveat about what I'm not talking about, because I'm suddenly flashing back to a conversation that we had once at my instigation, I believe, about ebooks. And I was talking about my own resistance to reading books in electronic form and why I think ebooks are poorly designed and a bunch of other criticisms of them. And I think that it was taken by some listeners to mean that no one should use ebooks and they have no purpose or function, which is obviously not the case. And, for many different reasons, including at times disability, that is just the preferred form for people to read in. So I want to make clear that what I'm saying about subtitles, or really closed captions, is what we're talking about, right? This is not foreign film subtitles. This is looking at the words in the language that you're already hearing on screen anyway. That is an important accessibility point, that it serves a great purpose, that, for example, when I'm watching with my parents who are both in their 80s and hard of hearing, we always use the closed captioning, and that's great. I'm just talking about what it is like to read closed captions when you're already hearing and understanding what's on the soundtrack anyway. And to me, that is really a strange, bothersome feeling that takes me out of the experience of what I'm watching, and I prefer not to do it. So I'm really interested in this conversation because I don't think I realized how widespread the use of those closed captions is among people who are not using them for disability or language reasons. But just recently, just this past weekend, as if to contribute to our conversation on the podcast, when I knew we were talking about this, we went to visit another family. My family did, and we had a little dinner party together. And then we all watched the movie My Cousin Vinny, because the kids in the family had never seen My Cousin Vinny. And everybody should see My Cousin Vinny for the sheer purpose of watching Marissa Tomei doing a great breakthrough comic performance in it. And the movie was great. But we noticed that this family, none of whom is hard of hearing or doesn't have English as a first language, just default had the closed captions on. So it obviously felt socially weird to say, oh, thank you for the lovely dinner and inviting us over to watch My Cousin Vinny, but could you please turn off those annoying closed captions? So we just watched the movie that way. And the entire time I was thinking about this conversation to come, and just wanting to know from the two of you what I would have wanted to know from them that night, which is why? What does this bring to the experience?
Wait, so Stephen, are you a closed caption watcher?
So it's on a case-by-case basis.
Oh.
So using two examples, for much of Succession, we had the closed captioning on. And I think the reason was there's a lot of dialogue and a lot of very precise dialogue. I also have noticed what the article gets into in quite a bit of detail, which is that due to the relationship between, the production technology of the shows and the transmission technology and compression technologies of the streamers, actually audio quality has degraded over the last, decade or so. And there are certainly shows. One example is Ted Lasso, especially this season. I feel like I'm missing half the dialogue, which turns out is a blessing for this season of Ted Lasso. But so then this odd added thing happened as I started watching Succession with them, which is, it is one way to describe it, Dana, you're right, is a kind of alienation from the material, right? But it opens up, another way to describe it opens up this tiny little gap, or a gap, an appreciable gap between the dialogue and the acting as two distinct artistic contributions to the show, right? And to have that little gap open up makes you realize the infinity of choices that the actor faced in that moment to deliver them comes home to you, and you see acting as a series of, highly instinctual, highly organic choices in the moment. But in a weird way, I kind of loved it. And Succession is such a written show. The idea that it is graphically something on the page, right, to me was actually quite powerful and drove the wordiness of it home to me in a way that I think enhanced it. A show like High Maintenance, I would never watch closed captioned. It's so weirdly poetic and oral, and cinematic in a way, in painting this mosaic of the borough of Brooklyn, that it feels so powerfully as though it was never originally on a piece of paper. Anyway, that's where I come out on it. June, what about you? I'm curious.
Our family is a closed captions on family and has been for many, many years. I think I learned that in 2012, I wrote a piece for Slate about how I always watch TV with the closed captions on. And it started as this show moves fast, I'm missing things, or maybe I'm not getting the accent. But it became a habit. And it's very ingrained. And in fact, it's funny that you should be talking about Succession, because over here, I recently moved, or about a year ago, actually, I moved to Britain, and I haven't quite figured out the television. And there are various methods of watching, and sometimes you get closed captions, sometimes you don't. And for Succession, the channel that I was watching it on, I could never, you believe me, I tried so many times, I could never get captions. And it made me kind of crazy, because I really don't like to watch things without the captions. And for me, it's kind of accepting all the benefits that modern life has to offer me. Like, in the past, there was no way of rewinding even, because that's sometimes people say, well, if you don't get it, just rewind. Well, yeah, I don't want to keep rewinding my television set. But in the past, that wasn't an option. In the past, dialogue went as fast or as slow as it went. If you missed something, it was like, listening to something in a foreign language. You might not get every word, but you're going to get the sense of it, supposing you speak that language, and you can comprehend. And it used to be that way. But now we have this wonderful gift of closed captions. And so I just believe we should take advantage of it. We also, for the most part, have bigger screens. So, we're not necessarily getting in the way of anything. My closed captions don't cover up any of the, wonderful mise en scène, I don't think. And to me, it's like listening to podcasts at 1.5 times speed or more sometimes. Like, in the old days, you had to listen to the radio at the speed they, sent it out at. Now, if I want to be more efficient, or if it suits the format, I can listen faster, be able to listen to more shows in the time available to me. And why would I not take advantage of that? There are actually some reasons why I wouldn't take advantage of that if it was really beautifully, created. But in general, to me, it's like, it's not hurting anyone. It's just adding to my experience. I don't need it, but I like it.
Wow, June, I'm really experiencing our difference in real time now, because I also cannot stand listening to things at any kind of increased speed. If it even gets to 1.1, I think, why do they sound like Mickey Mouse? It's the wrong voice. I want to hear the voice as it emerged from the person's mouth. I think maybe I'm just more of a seeker of authenticism or something, which is,
or a fetishizer of authenticism, perhaps.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, maybe I should be able to let go of those things, but I do feel when there are closed captions appearing that that were not originally intended by the creator, that it's blocking part of the screen. It's also changing the timing, frankly. I mean, especially with comedy. It was my daughter who observed this after we had my cousin Vinny experience at these friends' houses who do the default closed captions. She was saying, well, when you're watching comedy with closed captions, it sometimes anticipates the line, and so the timing of the actor is ruined because you already knew what they were going to say. Just clearly the closed captions are designed, I mean, this is a good thing, for legibility and clarity, and not for, necessarily keeping in tune with what the original creator of that movie or TV show intended. And so I just always feel that really intensely when I'm looking at them. I also just simply get distracted by choices like describing the music. I'll get stuck on, well, why are they calling that music muffled when it doesn't sound muffled? The things that appear in brackets that describe the incidental sound, just that really takes me out of it.
But at counterpoint, like, it only came home to me what a genius Greg Hirsch was as Cousin Greg when I saw some of those lines, like as written on the page, courtesy of the closed caption, and the guy's artistry. It's like looking at musical notation of a standard American songbook song while John Coltrane plays, My Favorite Thing or whatever, and just the improvisatory, organic, artistic appropriation of the notation to this other expressive form while hewing to it at the same time. To me, that was amazing. And I didn't feel a powerful urge to turn it off.
It's interesting to me, Dana, that the example you just gave was with watching a movie, because I'm very conscious that when I'm at home and I'm watching the television, and I rarely watch movies these days, I'm having a home viewing experience. I've only ever been in a movie theater and had closed captions showing, and that was when I accidentally once went to an accessibility-focused screening in London one time, and it wasn't, it was just by coincidence, and I actually did find it quite distracting there because that didn't feel right to me. But at this point, I've just become habituated. It's probably been at least 15 years that I've been doing it, and now when I can't, as I said, now here in Britain, there are some cases where I just can't figure it out. It just feels wrong, and it feels like it's a habit thing. Like you become accustomed to something, and when it's not there, it feels wrong, or when it is there, in your case, it feels wrong. And to me, the piece that you mentioned in the Atlantic, Stephen, mentioned this concept of lazy listening, and I will hold my hands up to that. It is a crutch for me. I don't really necessarily read. There are very few times these days when I'm actually counting on it, but it's helping me. It's assisting me, and I feel a bit deprived when it's not there for me.
Okay, well, the piece in The Atlantic, as I said, it's called Why Is Everyone Watching TV with the Subtitles On by Devin Gordon. It's really delightful to read it, and it's filled with very interesting info about degraded audio, on and on. Anyway, check it out. It's in The Atlantic, and we'd love to hear from you. What do you do? On, off, shoot us an email. All right, let's move on.
Macy's is committed to creating brighter futures for all. Throughout June, join Macy's in celebrating Pride Month by supporting the Trevor Project, whose mission is to provide life-saving suicide prevention services for LGBTQ young people. Just round up your next in-store purchase or donate online to the Trevor Project. Shop LGBTQ-owned brands and learn more by telling your smart speaker to open Macy's now.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse. Dana, what do you have this week?
Stephen, my endorsement actually comes out of our Plus segment this week. So if you're not a Slate Plus member, this will not have context, but we're going to be talking in Slate Plus about therapy speak and the sort of online rise of the language of therapy in everyday life, whether that's annoying or inappropriate or, something that is much needed in our very mentally unwell culture. And in order to sort of forestall the idea that we are here just to kick therapy around, I wanted to endorse I think a really good self-help book, which I listened to on audiobook during the height of the pandemic when everybody was mentally unwell. And I'm not sure how I came across it. I think because I follow the author on Twitter. Her name is Kathleen Smith. And she's a family systems therapist who just has a very nice, sensible, no-nonsense, sort of generous way of talking about mental health and family relationships. And so I thought, hey, I'll give her book a try. It's a very short 5.5-hour audiobook. It's read in part by her, Kathleen Smith, and it's called Everything Isn't Terrible. And the subtitle is Conquer Your Insecurities, Interrupt Your Anxiety, and Finally Calm Down. I really liked this because it has a very intimate conversational tone. It doesn't feel like bullet pointed therapy speak or sort of, like a business self-help manual. It actually feels like a specific writer with a specific voice talking to you. It's a little bit like a 5.5-hour therapy session where you don't have to say anything. You can just listen to Kathleen Smith. And since then I started reading her newsletter, and I just think she's a really wonderful writer on mental health and relationships. But a good place to start, and just a nice calming thing to listen to as you go about your day, is Everything Isn't Terrible by Kathleen Smith, and it's on Audible.
Oh, wow. June, what do you have?
Well, mine is also an audiobook, and I have to admit that it's something that I haven't fully consumed yet because I am so excited about it that I am kind of serving it to myself in little drips so that I can make it last. I'm really like titrating my experience, and it is the audible version of Alison Bechdel's Dykes to Watch Out For. It is done with a full cast that includes Carrie Brownstein as Mo, and Roberta Colindres as Lois, and Roxane Gay is in it, and Jane Lynch is the narrator. There are some amazing actors, and the sort of miraculous thing about it is just the way that it has brought to life something that I know so well, but that I feel like I'm seeing in a different way. Part of that is down to the fact that the really beautifully written comic strip has been taken and kind of used as the source material, but then a book has been written, as you might say, in the Broadway sense, by Madeline George, who is also, I would say, one of the big reasons that the great Hulu show Only Murders in the Building is so good. She is the showrunner of that and a writer. And it's just amazing. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. It's just so good. Yeah, I'm just in awe.
June, that's amazing. The minute you mentioned it, because I was on Audible anyway, having just recommended a book there, I looked this up and it just came out, right? It's brand new as of a couple weeks ago. And the first thing I was going to say when you mentioned it is, well, how would you turn Dykes to Watch Out For, a graphic, a comic series, into audio? So the idea of kind of adapting it as an acting piece is really wonderful. And look at the voices that are in it. My Lord. Okay, this is going to be my next Audible download. So thank you.
And I just want to warn people, like the initial setup, like the kind of, hey, you're listening to Jane Lynch is a little bit over the top. And at first I was like, oh my God, what is this? But it's just like, it's a little shock. And then it's like don't give up in the first like 10 seconds. Settle in. It's going to get amazing. Maybe I was the only person who had that response, but I shouldn't have. It's so lovely. What about you, Stephen?
All right. Well, I finally read a book that was recommended to me ages ago. It's by primarily he was known as a poet, the Russian poet Lermontov, widely considered to be the second greatest Russian poet of all time after Pushkin. He wrote a novel called A Hero of Our Time. And it was written in 1839, so very late in the Romantic movement. Byron had been dead for about 15 years, and this sort of Byronic type had overtaken Europe. I mean, like kind of like Elvis in America in the 50s or something. I mean, there was this, young men striving to imitate him. And this is an expression of Byronism as it reaches Russian shores and gets assimilated into the wild involutions of the Russian character in some sense. And the novel was hugely influential on Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. I mean, they all eventually read it. And it's this exploration of a nihilistic anti-hero and his sort of misadventures. And it's short and one of the most eminently page-turning, readable books I've ever read. I mean, it's just filled with like intrigue, sex, violence. The nature writing it's not a surprise that it was written by a poet. They're just these rhapsodic stretches, invoking the natural world in the Caucasus and out on the steppe. They're extraordinary, but it's really sort of, you see how it played into Dostoevsky in the most direct way, and that it's sort of exploring this flirtation with godlessness of modern life on the part of a young man who just feels as though all he can do is waste his life in some ways. He's a superfluous human being with an overabundance of consciousness and no place to put his actually quite considerable abilities. And it just has this weird element of sadism to it. It is one of the strangest, most gripping little books I've ever read. A Hero of Our Time by Lermontov. It's in a great Penguin edition. If you can find it, check it out.
I hope you're ready for all the Anna Akhmatova stands to come after you after that very bold statement you made at the beginning of that endorsement.
Really, really good catch. Let's say pre-20th century venerable dead great white male Russian poets. Lermontov comes in at number 2 with a bullet behind Pushkin, but Akhmatova is like the great Russian poet of the 20th century, no doubt. June, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really fun.
Thank you for having me. And hi to Dan, who said hello to me in the Sainsbury's in Stockbridge, who's a Culture Gabfest listener.
Did he voice recognize you?
He did. I was behind him in a line complaining about jammy dodgers, and he heard me.
That's so delicious. Dana, thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Fun time. You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest. And you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Bertel. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. Our producer is Cameron Drews. For June Thomas, Sam Adams, Dana Stevens, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
Macy's is committed to creating brighter futures for all. Throughout June, join Macy's in celebrating Pride Month by supporting the Trevor Project, whose mission is to provide life-saving suicide prevention services for LGBTQ young people. Just round up your next in-store purchase or donate online to the Trevor Project. Shop LGBTQ-owned brands and learn more by telling your smart speaker to open Macy's now.
Blue Ridge Hospice thrift shops are bigger and better than ever. With a new and expanded site at one of our 2 Winchester locations and our 6 well-established boutiques across the area. Blue Ridge Hospice thrift shops attract bargain hunters, treasure seekers, collectors, and antiquers. Mention this ad on your next shopping trip and receive a 10% discount. Blue Ridge Hospice thrift shops gratefully accept your donations, including electronics and furniture. For locations, hours, and information on how to donate, please visit blueridgehospice.org.